Hey everyone, Kyle Erickson here. It's not often that we see innovation in monitors these days outside of the panels themselves. Occasionally you might find things like webcams or upgraded speakers, but the monitor that I have here today is different and unlike anything that I've seen personally. This is the ASRock PG34WQ15R3A 34-inch curved ultrawide monitor, and besides having some great gaming specs like 1 millisecond response times and a 165Hz refresh rate, it's got some pretty wild features, incorporating the stand as a Wi-Fi antenna, which also has a small customizable OLED screen, amongst a host of other things. On the surface, most of these specs sound fantastic, so today we're going to take a deep dive into this monitor and figure out not only if it fits the bill for an amazing gaming experience, but we'll look at some of the real-world specs like brightness levels and color accuracy, and how it works for other uses like watching media and productivity. So with that said, let's get into it. Ultrawides have always been interesting to me. I love the potential of having an immersive gaming setup. The 21:9 aspect ratio is really nice, not only for that expanded view with gaming, but also for widescreen shows and movies. And depending on the model, they can be really helpful for productivity, mimicking a dual monitor setup without having to actually have two separate monitors. This ASRock monitor is really intriguing because not only does it focus on the viewing experience, but it tries to improve your network connection and your setup aesthetic as well. And it seems like it's really geared towards multiple aspects of your gaming experience versus just the one aspect of it. Because we got a few more features on the PG34WQ15R3A, that model number is a mouthful. Anyways, beyond just providing you your standard connections like your power, your video cables, along with the monitor and stand, you'll find a USB-A to USB-C cable for the mini OLED display that's on the front, some Wi-Fi cables, and then they've also thrown in a little cable sleeve as well to help out with cable management. One thing of note there, the cables are all just over 4 feet in length, so you want to make sure that your machine is fairly close by or that you pick up some longer cables. The same goes for being aware of how close your power outlet is to your monitor. Speaking of power, you'll notice that this monitor doesn't have any kind of external brick and it's just the cable alone. That can be good or bad. With some displays, you can tend to hear some noise with the power supply being internal to the monitor, but on this ASRock Ultrawide, everything is silent regardless of output or brightness levels. Just down from the power input on the monitor, you have a single DisplayPort 1.4 and 2 HDMI 2.0 ports, along with a 3.5mm audio output, and on the stand you've got 2 SMA Wi-Fi connectors, and a USB-C connector for the little customizable OLED screen. That stand does take up a pretty large surface area. I think it's about 26 inches wide by a foot deep or so, but it is very sturdy, and not only does it have that little screen on the front, but it does have supporting RGB lights on the back as well. It has height, swivel, and tilt adjustments, and both the stand and the monitor definitely have that aggressive gaming style to them without it being too over the top. If that isn't your style at all, this does have a vase mount, so you can attach this to a monitor arm or to another stand. Obviously doing that, you will miss out on the stand features, which we'll touch on in a few minutes. But I did want to call out that the build quality on both this stand and the monitor itself are very solid and well put together. The monitor has small bezels, and if you look at the lip on the bottom of the panel, it's really nice and uniform, and it doesn't bulge out anywhere, which can tend to be the case on some displays. The panel itself is an anti-glare VA panel, which you're going to find on most of these types of monitors. It's got a 3440 by 1440 resolution, and it's both Display HDR 400 and AMD FreeSync Premium certified. So you do get a high amount of dynamic range, and with FreeSync Premium you get variable refresh rate, which is a nice touch. Now, ASRock advertises this as having 550 nits brightness and a 3001 contrast ratio, covering about 91% of the DCI P3 color gamut. And it wasn't that far off in real world testing, where I saw 514 nits brightness with the default color profile and a larger contrast ratio closer to 4,000 to 1. When it comes to color accuracy and coverage, pre-calibration, it just squeaks past the nominal tolerance level that you'd want to see if you're using your monitor for tasks that are dependent on color. It's still totally acceptable for things like gaming and consuming content, but it was a touch inaccurate in the blues. And just when adjusting the white point, I found that it was a bit skewed over to the green side. Having said that, with the white point adjusted and color calibrated, I was able to get this quite accurate with a slight deviation from the given specs. I was seeing about 87% of the DCI P3 color gamut, around 100% of the sRGB gamut with a brightness of 427 nits and a contrast ratio of just over 3001. Basically, when it comes down to it, it does a relatively good job at being able to display color accurately, and the colors and contrast look exceptionally well. There's very little, if any, backlight bleed with good uniformity, and it does have decent viewing angles for a VA panel. If you're looking at it at a bit of an angle, you can notice some brighter portions on the screen and some discoloration because of that screen curvature, but overall, if you're using this at your desk, it's not likely going to bother you much. If you're new to ultrawides or you haven't used them for gaming, they can tend to make things a lot more immersive at times, especially for anything that's first-person based. But I really enjoy them for racing games and sports games as well, where you can see more of the field of play. With this ASRock monitor in particular, because it does have that high refresh rate and 1 millisecond response time, everything is very snappy and smooth. The color really pops, there's nothing washed out or off-putting, and I don't notice any obvious ghosting or smearing when gaming. That translates over to video and content as well. Everything there looks outstanding, and my favorite thing with content is viewing widescreen video that was made for this aspect ratio and fills out that entire panel. The high refresh rate isn't really going to affect content consumption, but there are a couple of things worth mentioning about it. If you want to use the display to its full potential, you will have to use a DisplayPort connection. With this having HDMI 2.0, that peaks at 100 Hz, which is somewhat important to note, especially if you're planning to hook this up to a device that only has HDMI output. On top of that, if you're using this more for productivity and viewing text or doing a lot of scrolling, I found that while 100 Hz and above refresh rates feel a lot smoother, they do introduce some black smearing when you're looking at light text on dark backgrounds. But if you move the refresh rate down to 60, most of that disappears. That's fantastic news for folks who do want to use this more for productivity or viewing a lot of text. I know that this is really geared towards gaming and PCs, but that's likely not all it'll get used for. And for some Mac users with M-series chips that only support one external display, this will give you a dual monitor-like setup that is usable in that regard. Normally, I wouldn't have much else I'd look at on a monitor, but there are a few things on here that really make this stand out. This is the worst pun ever. These things are unique and relate to the stand in particular. If you watch my budget PC build a few months back, you might remember me saying how much I dislike the little antennas that come with a lot of motherboards. They just stick out like a sore thumb, and this stand not only allows you to get rid of those entirely with it having an internal antenna, but ASRock advertises that it also gives you a higher signal strength. They're advertising about a 4 to 5 dBIP gain on the stand antenna versus these little guys, and in my testing I found that to be right on the money. I get better signal strength, no drops or issues with my connection, and this antenna is compatible with any Wi-Fi version from version 4 all the way up to 7. The other unique thing about this stand that I want to touch on is this little 1.3-inch display. You can technically upload up to 3 GIFs or images to display on here through the Polychrome Sync software. I was having a bit of difficulty finding the Polychrome software that was specifically for this monitor, maybe because this monitor is so new and it's not readily available yet. So I reached out to ASRock and they were kind enough to point me in the right direction. The software itself is easy enough to use, and having that customization available not only for that mini OLED screen, but also for the RGB lights on the back is a nice little touch. Some other things to note, this does have two 2-watt internal speakers and they sound all right. They don't have any depth and they're fairly quiet, being only 2 watts. I don't think that they're meant to be spectacular by any means, which is usually the case with internal monitor speakers. Nothing that I would count on to drive your setup, but if you're using headphones most of the time, or you're just concerned with using this more for productivity, maybe they're good enough, but otherwise I just use them in a pinch. For things I'd like to see added in here or changes that I'd make, I'd probably include a bit longer cables. I think going to at least 6 feet would make a world of difference for some folks. And I know that this would probably cost a lot more to make, but having HDMI 2.1 versus 2.0 would be nice for folks who are forced to use that HDMI output. I do think that mini OLED is really cool, but it would be even better if it could somehow show notifications or be a tad more functional and adjust some kind of settings through it. And just in regards to settings, I did find the built-in menu to be a tad on the simple side. It'd be nice if there were some more options in there, maybe adjusting Kelvin values or specific temperature settings, but honestly, there isn't a ton I have to complain about here. This monitor will be priced at $499, and in that price range compared to other ultrawides that I've tried with similar specs, I think the PG34WQ15R3A is a bit nicer, and if I was shopping for a gaming monitor with a high refresh rate, low response times, and a 1440 WQ HD resolution, I would definitely take a long, hard look at this one. Let me know what you guys think of the monitor in the comments down below. Do you think this Wi-Fi antenna and this little screen are cool, or do you think that this is kind of gimmicky? If you did find a sprinkle of enjoyment from consuming this particular moving picture, hit that like button. If you want to see more tech-related content, or if you want to eat salt and vinegar chips with me until we burn off all our taste buds, please subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next upload.